be. We must find ways how to actually balance the lacking carbon pricing in India, in China, in other parts of the world by using this mechanism. Of course, it will be not perfect in the beginning, for sure. We just gave the legislative proposal for our national parliament of implementing CBAM, but we must keep working with that to make it a significant barrier against unfair competition. We need also to be much faster in permitting critical minerals, net zero industry, other things. It's mainly national thing, but also EU-level legislation must be streamlined. And we overall must turn Green Deal into more industrial, clean investment deal, which the newly elected Commission seems to be at least taking the right approach. In Finland, we have been also witnessing fast, positive development in low-carbon roadmaps of the different industrial sectors, especially energy sector. Very inspiring. During summertime, they published a new approach that they are themselves believing that the energy sector in Finland will be net zero carbon industry within 10 years' time, already by 2035. That kind of approaches we need to support and get industry themselves to plan the way forward to sustainable future. But what we need to do is to do our homework, have long-term, durable, predictable targets and policy framework. We need to start now, frame and decide the post-2030 architecture of European climate and energy legislation, and I really hope that we would be able to go forward already first half of next year, when Poland is actually taking presidency in the EU, and we, Finland, are very eager to support that road towards sustainable, technology-neutral, competitive Europe. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that was the opening remarks from Mykkänen, Minister of Climate and the Environment from Finland. Thank you very much. And once again, controlling key resources, Europe's role in geopolitics of green transition. That is the topic of another panel discussion. And the moderator would be Piotr Przybyło, resident fellow in Casimir Pulaski Foundation. Big applause.
Good morning. I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists today, speaking about the key resources. Marc-Antoine Eyl-Mazzega, Director, Center of Energy and Climate from France. Sebastian Płóciennik, Director from Foundation for Polish-German Cooperation from Poland. Sergey Lagodinsky, Member of the European Parliament from Germany. And last but not least, Monika Morawiecka, Senior Advisor and Regulatory Assistance, representing Poland. Truly Weimar Triangle representation. Welcome. In terms of controlling key resources, is Europe controlling their key resources? What's the sort of view from your perspective? Marc-Antoine.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I think it's a real challenge that we're facing, because none of the resources that we need today or tomorrow we have a control on. The gas price, the oil price, the steel price, the aluminium price, the raw material prices, everything is set outside. And to make matters worse, in several cases, the electricity price, because of the marginal gas pricing system, is also set outside of our control. So we are basically price takers. Now it seems we are somehow luckier because there's a lot of LNG available, and because the Saudis tend to be fed up with their fellow OPEC panel members cheating on volume. So more willing to give up more production and exports. But it's a very complicated situation to be in. So we have the highest energy costs, and the costs and the prices for the things that we consume or that we need to produce are set outside. And often in jurisdictions where there's no carbon pricing, there's very loose regulation. So that doesn't mean we should stop or we should dismantle everything we have. But, you know, the framework is very, very complicated.
You're painting a very gloomy picture and landscape for Europe. Sebastian, what's the view from your point? Are we outsourcing our energy resources to someone else instead of sort of increasing our independence? What's your view?
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. And answering your question, I think I mean here the European Union, Europeans, we got acquainted to a system of open trade. So of course we can purchase our critical materials and energy outside, and this is only a matter of price, which must be a market price, of getting access to that. I think this world is over now. There is so much intervention now on critical markets. There is so much regulation that we need to be prepared to negotiate very harshly on every detail of these of this kind of exchange. Peter Thiel, well-known investor and also we can say political activist, commented once very rightly the situation of Germany. Now trying to escape from the trap of being too dependent on gas and energy imports from Russia. That he said that China is like Nord Stream multiplied by 100. So this dependency is much more dangerous for the German economy. When we talk about German economy, we must extend this argument to the whole continent because our industries are intertwined and mutually dependent.
Thank you. Sergey, so European Union is trying to sort of somehow, you know, provide a strategy, sort of the energy strategy for entire Europe, for example, with the Critical Raw Material Act. What's your view? Is that's enough? More has to be done? Because at the moment we are hearing really gloomy scenario and not that sort of, you know, bright future. Where are we standing?
Yeah, well, thanks a lot for inviting us here, and it's important to speak about those issues, especially here in Warsaw, where we have been hearing warnings regarding our key resources and raw materials and our dependencies on certain powers with whom we do not trade anymore. And we have been ignoring, not us, the Greens were always on the right side of history, but many in our German government, for example, were ignoring those warnings, and now we have to pay the high price that we're paying. We are now in a new age when we talk about resources and materials. It used to be that this was kind of a twofold debate. Either this was an environmental debate for the green freaks like myself, or it was a growth debate. Without resources, no economic growth. Now we are in the geopolitical realm, where both of those dimensions get together and where we understand that this is just one part of a geopolitical game we are in. And the geopolitical games we used to play were on different chessboards. There was a chessboard of hard power, and there was a chessboard of soft power. Well, there is another chessboard now in town, and this is the chessboard of green power. And talking about green, I mean the green transition we are in. This is the actual new game which we are playing, and we have to play. And in this game, there are powers who play it only in terms of controlling resources like Russia, but there are also powers who play in it also in terms of designing their own green transition, like China. And these might be powers where we are not aligned in terms of values, but they are there, and we have to have a strategy vis-à-vis those powers. So the Raw Materials Act of the European Union is one part of this
of this package. With our CHIPS Act, we're talking about another dimension of the green and digital transition that we're talking. But the main point here is the shift toward a geopolitical transitional thinking. And now with Draghi report, we understand that this transition from A to B cannot be a flat transition. It has to be linked to a diagonal. If A is here, then B has to be here. We must link it to growth. We must link it to competitiveness. And if we have an agenda where competitiveness and growth work together with the green transition and democracy, then we need the strategic thinking and geopolitical thinking about our raw materials and resources. This is the thinking that we have to exercise, and that's why the European Union is here on the right side of history, and that's why we, the Greens, also support it, because this green transition will only be possible if we think about it in strategic terms, also in terms of our resources.
Thank you. Monika, what's the view from your perspective?
Well, thank you, and it's very good to be speaking last in this first round, and especially after previous panels, because I really like to first focus on the false narrative that we have, that I think is false narrative, that we are, with the transition we're doing, that we are replacing one dependency on fossil fuel imports with another dependency on technology imports, because it's completely different dependency. From a security of supply perspective, from our energy security perspective, it's a completely different world. Being dependent on fuel supplies for your current generation needs, for your current heating needs, for your current power generation, it's a completely different story than depending on imports of technologies for future investments. So if we freeze in time, and I'm now thinking, okay, one scenario, I'm fully dependent on fuels. Day by day, I need to, fire those power plants with those fuels, and somebody cuts those fuels, I'm done. In the another scenario where I'm dependent on future technology imports for my future investments, then if somebody cuts that, exporting technology to me, okay, I won't make those investments, but I'm still secure in the short term. So it's a different perspective. It's not an energy security perspective, it's a competitiveness perspective, and it's speed and cost of the transition perspective. And I think we have to balance it out. Because, of course, we don't want to import all technologies, all green technologies we need from elsewhere. We would like to have them produced in Europe, of course. And it's a question of our industrial standpoint, of our competitiveness, of our economic development, of our jobs. All that is true. But then we have to balance it with the speed we're going at and with the cost of it. Because if Chinese turbines are 40% cheaper than produced in Europe, then we'll have to ask ourselves, where is our priority? Okay, we might do it slower, we might do it later, the transition, we'll have it domestic. But let's keep that in mind, that these are trade-offs. We can't have it all, and I think Draghi report also lays it out. We can't have it all. We have to choose, but let's not be fooled by this false narrative that we are just replacing one dependency with other, because it's not the same dependency.
Thank you very much. That's really interesting, and you almost... I wanted to ask Mark, based on what Monika just said, in terms of Europe and the need for sort of energy transition, we need those critical raw materials, and I'm not going to be sort of, the quoting right now the percentages, but we know that in terms of production and processing, even if we can sort of supply those critical raw materials from other countries like Australia, Chile, which are not sort of, the Southeast Asia sort of, located. What can we do in terms of sort of that sort of dependency on China? Is that sort of affecting the energy transition? You see in terms of the future, that might affect the speed of the energy transition? If we're speaking about production and processing of critical raw materials coming from China, we are fully dependent on that, building on what Monika just said.
Yes, China is clearly the opportunity, but also the extraordinary challenge. And I mentioned that, they set basically all the raw material prices. And now all the raw material prices, just when we are to invest, are going down because they so decided, because they want to make sure that their dominant position remains. So it adds to the challenge, because if prices are up, it's easier to launch the investments than when prices are down. So that's one point. Point two, everyone really needs to understand that the challenge on raw materials is for the next 10 to 15 years, because once all the low carbon technologies are deployed in Europe, all the materials will be here and we will recycle it. So we will less need to mine, we will less need to import, because everything will be here, provided that our legislation makes sure that all these products stay in Europe. And as we speak today, right here in Europe, all the battery material scrap that goes out of the gigafactories, all the already existing small volumes but still existing black mass volumes, all these leave the EU borders. They are very valuable materials. They leave the EU borders and they go to our competitors. By the way, not only China but also South Korea. So we should fix that very clearly. Now the next point is, yes, we are going to need to import many of those raw materials, and so we will have to support mining operations abroad. But a mine is not an operation where you tick all the ESG boxes. We have to be flexible with that. So what I see now is that our institutions want to have the best perfect mining project that doesn't exist. So basically they don't finance anything. So if I look at what the European Investment Bank is doing, it's nothing. Now I look at what the Americans are doing. The US Financial Development Corporation has just issued for 30 projects within a few months, 400 million of credit loan guarantees and various support measures for 30 critical raw materials projects in the world, in Africa, in Latin America, elsewhere, so that they make sure that the material goes to the US. And, so for us, the decision is also, do we want a perfect transition or do we want to work on a process, And on China, to finish, and on the issue of competition, very clearly, if we want to roll out the offshore wind today in Europe, we will have to have Chinese equipment. But if we are not careful, we will be overflooded. The Chinese, within 3 years, have installed over 30 gigawatt of offshore wind. That is more than us in Europe, with the UK, with Norway combined, that we did in 15 years. So the fast and the speed and the scale of what the Chinese are doing is overwhelming. So if we don't pay attention, we will basically not survive that as well. So we will have the same situation as in solar. And so just not to make it too long, but one very important thing is, what do we need to do? We need to fast-track permitting. We have to give a huge pipeline of projects to our industries in the Baltic Sea, in the North Sea, on the French Atlantic coast, for the floating offshore wind in the Mediterranean. So we have to come up really and align all that so that our industries, our equipment suppliers really can say, okay, we're going to build factories for that, for the transformers, for the cable laying vessels, etc., etc. Otherwise, if we continue just the way we have done, for 100% for sure, we won't get the offshore wind deployment targets reached. We will have much more Chinese equipment here, and we will lose out on every possible front, I'm afraid.
Thank you so much for that opinion. Sebastian, question to you. So in terms of recycling capacity, I know that Poland is trying really hard to sort of, improve the capacity for recycling. But if I remember correctly, when I was preparing for this panel, we reach around 12% of recycling, sort of, across Europe, and those numbers are not sort of rising. So what more can we do in terms of recycling capacity in Europe and in Poland?
Of course, we have to do our homework, right, to reach some goals which are specified on the EU level. However, we should not forget that we are developing our economy in a very deep dependency from our European partners. And also, if I look at the connections, now a bit troublesome because of the stagnation in Germany with the German industry. we should be concerned about the position of the Polish economy and the European economy in the globalization, right? And of course, what you describe here and what we are talking here about can easily fall under the umbrella with a big inscription, polycrisis, right? So we cannot just find one answer, one miracle measure against this crisis. If I'm trying to look for a good metaphor and big picture to bring all these problems together, maybe Danny Roderick with his globalization paradox is a good person to explain that. Because Danny Roderick brought into debate now a kind of revised paradox. It's not anymore hyper-globalization, democracy and sovereignty, but climate change, but I understand under this also our technological change, the condition of the middle class in developed economy, so I understand through that the condition of the European middle class in general. And the third corner is the fight against global poverty. And we cannot really have more than two of these points. So we have a choice how to move on. If we give up the green transition, probably in a couple of decades our economies will collapse. If we say, okay, we don't care about the condition of the global south, our world will also be in danger. So what's the answer of Danny Roderick? And actually you brought these two answers on the example. So first, deals with countries which dispose of resources that might be interesting for us, and countries which decisions may impact efficiency of the green transition. So it means we transfer our fiscal capacities to some extent, very difficult if you look at the conditions of the European economies, but also technologies. And the second point, we should keep our markets open to these countries. If not, we will see globalization turning into slowbalization and then probably into deglobalization. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that point. Sergey, so should we be worried about our climate net zero targets in terms of energy transition, and with this sort of, the current global situation? Should we revise them? Should we be a little bit more careful about them? Or what can we we are still optimistic in terms of reaching them?
I don't think being worried is a good strategy in politics. But we should be aware of the challenges. Look, we have, of course, now with the hearings of the commissioners and with the debate about the new commission and the new targets and the new policies, it's an important point in time here. And I think that Madam von der Leyen is very clear on that. And I hope she will remain clear that the targets will remain. Why? Because it's a business issue. It's a certainty for our businesses and for our companies. We cannot say to companies during one parliamentary term, the target is 2030, and during the next parliamentary term, the target is 2035. And yes, some of the businesses will be having troubles because they didn't take care of it on time, like the Volkswagen in Germany. Well, but we cannot adjust our pace to the failures of the individual businesses. They should have done it before. We can talk about subsidies, about how to soften the issue, but we cannot adjust the motor in Europe, the engine in Europe, depending on the failures of management of certain companies. So from that perspective, the targets must remain. The targets must be clear. The question is, how do we get there? And this is where the Draghi report, I think, is very good. With all the different criticism and critique that you can imagine, the 2 points that are important there, and I think the main point there, and this is where I agree. Everyone is talking about this report and saying it's about deregulate. We have to deregulate. Well, this is actually not the core of the report. The core of this report is to be more strategic and to be more generous in terms of our investment. These are the 2 points. Everything else is distraction. People who don't want to invest more, like the liberals in Germany, or some German governmental people, they would like to refocus on regulation issues. But this is not the main point about Draghi report. The main point is, if we want to catch up, we need to invest much, much more, also with our own resources, maybe on the European Union level, and we must invest strategically. Not everywhere, but look where we still have an opportunity. For example, if it's an AI, then it's maybe not the big language models, but this is AI and industry, greening industries, where we still have an opportunity as opposed to many other sectors of the industry. These are our opportunities, but we will only be able to catch up if we invest more. And then it's not the matter of targets. It's the matter of the way to those targets. Infrastructure and new technologies, green technologies, this is our chance, but we have to do our homework.
Do you think technological neutrality might play a crucial role in that, what you just said?
Technological neutrality, depending on what you mean. If there are some people who are saying, let's talk about e-fuels, is this what you mean, and not just focus on one particular technology like electromobility? Well, we don't insist that this should be just motors and engines only. It can also be, in certain sectors of economy and of traffic, it can also be hydrogen. But it should make sense. And the problem is that e-fuels do not make sense in terms of the output and input. And if we want to get the target right, then let's talk about it pragmatically, but let's not have some illusions in terms of hydrogen issues. Yes, this could be a good complementary technology. In terms of e-fuels, we're not sure about that.
Thank you. Monika, so the question for you, we always speak about Europe as a sort of, the entity, united entity, but there are huge differences in terms of carbon-intensive economies across Europe. So do you think we should tackle the problem of key resources and sort of dependencies or interdependencies differently in different sort of countries, like Poland versus Sweden, for example? The carbon intensity in those two economies is quite different. So how can we sort of tackle that issue, if at all?
Well, yeah, of course, some countries are better endowed if it comes to natural resources and previous decisions as well. Like we have legacy decisions. Some countries invested heavily in technologies that we don't have now. But that's history. I mean, we can't do anything about it now. What we can do is looking to the future, and we have to. Each country is doing the same thing, really, looking at the possible future scenarios for energy transition and choosing the most economically advantageous path given the targets. And that's what everybody's doing. I think Poland actually has a clear-cut job. I mean, we just. In many ways, we have it easier because all investments here are certain that they're going to happen because they need to happen to replace our fossil fuels, our fossil generation. So in many ways, investors looking at Poland see this is an opportunity because it's clear what has to be done. In countries like Finland, Sweden, that's going to be difficult now because the prices are getting too low on the wholesale market. It's very difficult for investors to find a business case. So you have to look at it from different perspectives. And I think also building on what has been said before at the ministerial panel, we need to work a lot on interconnectivity around Europe. So interconnectors, building a really interconnected pan-European market will help everybody because we'll spread the resources that we have more equally around Europe. We've said a lot about Scandinavia being the battery for Europe. It's not as easy like that, but it is a question of efficiency, and I want to maybe spend 1 minute on efficiency and operation efficiency, because we are talking all about investments, but we also have to be efficient how these investments are then operated and how these investments are put to best use. And looking at Germany, for example, the fact that Germany still has one single price zone within its national borders is hampering this efficiency very much. So we need to go deeper and not only look at the long-term targets, but also how, and it has been said before, how to get there most efficiently, how to get there that we, minimize the cost, maximize the benefits, textbook sort of thinking, but we don't have enough of this textbook thinking sometimes in Europe, I think.
Thank you very much. We have literally 1 minute for a question from the audience.
Rafa Libera, thank you very much for an interesting conversation. I had two interrelated questions. First one is, if you rely so heavily on technology from outside EU, like because, for example, components or the end products are much cheaper in China or another country, how can you ensure that you actually drive technological progress here in Europe when you have effectively importing the end product that's already been built, designed somewhere else? And secondly, regarding minerals and the shortages that are currently expected, and for example, we're talking about interconnectors, when it comes to copper availability, there are shortages, therefore high voltage cables, subsea, need to have aluminium in them. Do you see in the next 5-10 years significant investment in Europe in mineral, not only refining and processing, but also actual mining and production of mining minerals?
Anyone would like to answer?
Very quickly on the mineral side, there is some potential. Copper, for example, obviously in Bulgaria and Spain. Poland is the biggest copper producer of Europe, and I think we should be all happy and proud about that. Now, the key will be, as everywhere else, fast-track permitting. If we have permitting processes that are the way they used to be, with a lot of uncertainty, with years and claims and whatever, it's not going to happen. Otherwise, it could work. But the economics are not that good, let's face that. Why that? Because again, the Chinese bring the prices up and down when they so decide. And because the scale of production in Europe will never match the fantastic copper plays that we have in the sub-Saharan African copper belt, or that we have in Chile, for example, So we have to be mindful of that. But what we can do best in Europe, our homework is to fast-track the permitting and ease all these procedures.
Sebastian, just the last 30 seconds, the last comment, please.
Okay, so there are certain competitiveness profile. Americans make progress with market. China with market plus state. And this is the way to create radical innovations. Europe is prone to produce incremental innovations. Now we have to answer the question, which way is better for us to keep up with the most important competitors? The Chinese way, more state, more regulation, more intervention, or deregulation and American way?
Guys, thank you very much for educating us today. It was a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you.
So we are online and we are ready for another